Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Medical Myths, the show about what not to do with your body. And today we're taking a little bit different of an approach because we are talking about something very, very big, very broad that affects every single one of us in slightly different ways depending on where we live. But we're talking about climate change. And unfortunately, people still deny the fact that climate change even exists at all, which is hilarious to me and very sad that people still are on that side. But my guest today is Manda, aka Pale Blue Mama. Can you introduce yourself to my audience?
Hi, I'm Manda, Pale Blue Mama. I work in climate science, mostly with endangered species and how changing ecosystems affect each species. But overall, pretty good person to talk to when it comes to climate change, I think, at least in this community. So,
Yeah, Amanda does know what she's talking about. She is very well studied in the science of climate change. And this is why I'm bringing her on to talk about this, because I am not afraid to admit that I don't know a whole lot about this issue, and I'm excited to hear Manda's take on the video and the articles that we're going to be reacting to today. I see some wonderful people in the chat. We got Amit, we got Beck, we got Scarlet, Harmonica Man, Trusty Ape, Bolt, Bree. Lots of people showing up to hear about climate change. So, are you ready for the the video that I found? I just found this before. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before, but this one is very, very funny. I'm going to share my screen. And I'll stop, even though it's a 1-minute video, I'll stop to make sure we're not getting sniped by copyright.
I don't want to give trillions and trillions of dollars.
Can you all hear it?
I don't want to lose millions and millions of jobs. I don't want to be put at a disadvantage.
I wish you could go to Greenland, watch these huge chunks of ice just falling into the ocean, raising the sea levels.
And you don't know whether or not that would have happened with or without man. You don't.
So I'm stopping just for commentary purposes so we don't get sniped.
Remember when he wanted to buy Greenland? Was it Greenland or ice? It was Greenland, right?
Did he?
Yes. There was a minute
like
that was like, yeah, we should totally get rid of Puerto Rico and buy Greenland. Yeah. So
he's sharing his opinions on the scientists of this issue.
No.
Well, you're scientists at
No,
NOAA
we have
and NASA.
scientists that disagree with that.
You know, I was thinking, what if he said, no, I've seen the hurricane situations. I've changed my mind. There really is climate change. And I thought, wow, what an impact.
So the whole point of this issue is, and like of this video, is there are scientists, the overwhelming majority of scientists that say that climate change is real and that humans have a significant impact on it. And then people like this who have been in charge of a country just said, yeah, well, but there are some scientists that don't agree. So can we even trust the majority of scientists if we have these few that don't agree?
I want to talk about that really quick. The whole thing, it goes back to the fact that 97%, it's always this number because there's 2 times when 97% comes up when it comes to climate change. It's 90% of those working in a field related to climate science say that is anthropogenic in nature, meaning it's man-made, that we cause this. And also 97% of the data that we have gathered points directly to it being man-made in nature. So there's 2 separate 97% here. It's kind of interesting because if you look back prior to about 2005, we didn't have any directed science when it comes to what is causing climate change. We didn't there was no actual research to say, okay, these CO2 levels are coming directly from man or whatever. We had to take decades worth of information and analyze it and see where it came out in terms of how man affected the changing climate. And like I said, not only was 97% of that data pointing directly to humans, but now 97% of climate scientists and environmentalists and all of those, they all agree that climate change is anthropogenic. Well, here's the thing, and this is, part. I'm assuming where he gets part of this is like, oh, well, we have scientists that disagree, and I'm not just talking about the scientists that are paid by big oil or whatever. I'm talking about overall worldwide. We have 97% of the scientists that say this is, humans cause this. And there's this meme out there that says, 97% of scientists agree that climate change is caused by man. And somebody said, oh, well, what about the other 3%? And the guy says, well, if 97% of stockbrokers told you to buy a stock, wouldn't you buy that fucking stock? Like, there's a lot of people that don't understand that don't work in the sciences know that there is no 100%. If you've watched, did you watch Don't Look Up?
I didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, there's this, everybody who's seen it, it's about an asteroid, but it's really about climate change, really. And there's this point where the scientists are explaining to people in the White House, what are we going to do? And they're like, well, this is a 99.6% certainty that this asteroid is going to hit Earth. And they're like, oh, so there's a possibility that it won't. And they're like, not really, but there's no 100% certainty when it comes to science. It's that kind of thing. And people like Trump and climate deniers and big oil will all kind of glom onto that last 3% and say, oh, well, there's a chance. Not really. We're doing the best that we can in terms of science, but in all honesty, it's man-made and we fucking know it. So
we have a question from Amit in the chat. What can we show someone to help them understand that climate change is anthropogenic, especially when that person doesn't accept temperature trends?
That's an interesting question. It's not just temperature trends. If you look at the CO2 levels, and plenty of times you'll have people tell you, well, CO2 levels in the past have been, I think they're if you look at the study right now, it's around at the Keeling curve, which if you don't know what the Keeling curve is, it measures the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's about 420 parts per million right now. And yes, in our planet's history, we've had CO2 levels that have been higher than that, but the amount that it's risen in the short amount of time that has happened, and plus you have to look at what other factors would there be for our change in climate right now. One of the things that climate deniers will often state is, oh, well, our climate has never been, we've never had climate stasis throughout our global history. And no, we haven't. We've had climate and weather extremes throughout all of our planet's history, but it's a time thing. And the fact that we're currently in an ice age, technically, we're in an interglacial period of said ice age, but in terms of where our planet should be, we should be cooling. And we're clearly not. Not only are we warming and CO2 levels are rising, but it's such an astronomical amount and such a crazy rate that we've never really been able to explain outside of we are pumping these greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. Last month, I think it was a month and a half ago, there were temperatures in the Arctic, I think the Arctic or Antarctic. One was 70 degrees Fahrenheit above average temperature, and one was 50 degrees above average temperature for each of the poles. And that's just insane. You know, a lot of the articles I read about it were like, scientists are baffled by this. No, we're not. We're not baffled by it. We know what the fuck is happening. We're surprised because it's such a huge event and nobody gives a shit. You know, the gates around the Supreme Court that they put up, and everybody said, oh, well, that was because of the Roe v. Wade protesters. They went up beforehand because somebody set themselves on fire in climate protest in front of the Supreme Court right after that happened with the Antarctic and Antarctic. And nobody knew that. That seems like something that should be a topic of conversation, but it's not. Everybody is ignoring. And I get the idea of climate fatigue. Fatigue of any sense. We have the same thing going on with the pandemic right now. But there's, you know, only so much we can say and do, and people get tired of hearing that we're basically all going to die. And it's sad, but it's true.
Well, and talking about this issue and with climate fatigue, if we know that we're already on a terrible trajectory in terms of this issue and we're not doing much about it, and I get people are feeling kind of hopeless about this situation. What is kind of your response to, like, do we need to focus? I mean, of course, we probably need to focus more on this issue, but do you think that we're too far gone at this point? Do you think there's anything we can do going forward, or where do we go from here?
No, it's a matter of mitigating the damage that is happening and will happen. No matter what, we're kind of screwed. Obviously, like I get in trouble a lot for saying, you know, it's the end of the planet, because obviously I studied astrophysics as well as climate science. I know that the physical planet itself is going to stand, that there will be species beyond us and the other species on the planet now, but it is going to be drastically different, and it's going to become unlivable very soon. As it stands, we're in the middle of our sixth mass extinction event. We're losing about 30,000 species every year, roughly, and that's just the ones that we know about. We really estimate it to be closer to 50,000 species a year that we lose. And it's about kind of prolonging the amount of time left that we have as a species. That, you know, think about that's the thing that breaks my heart the most about climate science and climate change is what we as a species are doing to every other living thing on this planet. We're, especially in in my field where I work, like I said, with endangered species and how they're affected by climate change, and to watch them kind of drop off one by one, and there's nothing that they can do about it. You know, they can adapt and change as best they can, but they can't, you know, move to a better climate. They can't build themselves houses and be in air conditioning or keep themselves away from the more extreme weather events. They can't do that. Only we can do that. So no. So the answer, I guess, is yes and no. We're fucked, but there are ways to make this better for us and the rest of the planet, and to prolong the time in between now and we're super duper totally fucked.
So it's a very depressing situation, but we're going to laugh at some people who think that this isn't happening. And this is, I mean, it's going to be a heavy episode no matter what, because the fact that these people are in denial of this is, while it's funny, it's also really upsetting to think that this is propaganda that is being spread to people, and that people just don't care about the impact of their words on these species. It's really terrifying. But I found this website that I'm going to share with all of you. So this is just open source system science solutions. They're making it seem like they are a scientifically legitimate database. But if you look at the titles of some of these articles, this is the first one I think we're going to go over. That's says 31,000 scientists say no convincing evidence. And then you go down the side here, and it's just pages and pages and pages of conspiracy theories about climate change.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts right away just looking at this website?
Well, it's like you said, it's a lot of cherry picking. There are people that are hired by big oil and that have been for decades to specifically combat actual climate science, to take little kernels of information and kind of grow it into this kind of thing where they spread misinformation to the point where the public, who, you know, for lack of better understanding, hell, in America, lack of just proper scientific education, you know, don't know how to argue against it. When you have, you know, somebody talking about, again, you know, how climate has changed in the past, or the fact that, oh, look, like that fucking idiot, I can't remember his name. There was that congressman that came out on the floor of the Senate with a snowball and was like, what climate change? You know, it was global warming back then. But, you know, any little tiny nugget of information that they think is a dunk on the entire discipline is really hard to get around, because it seems that we spend so much time fighting these little cherry picked data points that actually mean nothing in the long run.
Mm-hmm. So we might not spend a whole lot of time on this specific article, just because we already kind of touched on the 97%, and that's what they're going with here. So they're clearly using this 31,000 number to seem like it's a huge number of people that disagree and that think that there's no convincing evidence. But compared to the entire scientific community, how much really is 31,000 people?
Plus, that's even an incorrect number, because the 97% is specifically those that work in and around climate science. And this is stating of all scientists. So it's a little...
Which is interesting, because, like, why would anybody care what I have to say about climate science? Like, I have a degree in biology, but, like, I'm in medical school. Nobody should give a crap what I have to say about the evidence of climate change. That's not my field. I am not qualified. And I think it's dangerous to assert that because you have a science degree that you are an authority on issues outside of your discipline. And especially, like we say this frequently on this channel, that the more advanced degrees you go through, the more specialized you become. And the more specialized you become, of course, you have more authority in one very narrow area, but you are no longer really able to talk about anything outside of that, because you're so out of touch with every other subject area. And even, like, you're focusing, if you're doing PhD research, it's on a very narrow area of your very narrow specialty already.
Yeah.
So the whole PhD thing is not enough to give you broad credibility. So this is misleading in the way that they are talking about this.
They seem they borrow a lot from... there's this, like, faction of geologists that fight against climate science, and I don't know why that is, and why people are asking. I mean, we did have to learn a lot about geology when studying about climate change. When it comes to climate change, it encompasses a whole lot of scientific disciplines: biology, chemistry, ecology, geology, like a lot of them. And not to say that I'm an expert in any of them. It's like I have pieces of them all in my brain in order to study climate science. But, you know, it's just, how are you going to sit there and look at a climate scientist who spent their life studying this and then go, oh, well, this geologist over here has this one data point that might refute that. And unfortunately, when it comes to climate science, it's not an exact science. It's not something that, but the thing is, when it comes to science in general, there aren't a lot of sciences that are exact. Science is about disproving your own hypothesis in order to further your understanding about anything. And unfortunately, like I said, this country's education system kind of sucks. Our science, especially, is very lacking. And when you have people that haven't taken a science class since junior year in high school, they took chemistry or whatever, and all of a sudden they've read a couple articles online and they know exactly what they're talking about. It's a little on the frustrating side.
Trying to pull up something interesting for us to really go through. I think it might be fun to talk about ClimateGate. Right. Unless it doesn't seem like they're actually. I want to find one that we can really talk. This one, they're claiming it's the sun.
Which,
wow.
I've explained in detail, as well as, like I said, I before I studied climate science, I studied astrophysics. And there is, it says it right there, an 11-year sunspot cycle where it, it increases in intensity for 11 years and then it decreases in intensity for 11 years. So at some point, yes, there are going to be more solar erosions that we get that do affect. I'm not saying that there is absolutely no effect whatsoever that they have on our planet, but it's aside from the fact that, again, we're talking about a span of the last 170 years that everything has been increasing, CO2 levels, temperature, and whatnot. But the sunspot cycles have not changed. They continue at the same rate that they always have been. So that just debunks it right there. And unless there's something going on with the sun that we're unaware of, and all of a sudden, in billions of years of burning hydrogen and helium, it's decided to change, but it hasn't. Same goes for the tilt of the Earth. The tilt of the Earth matters when it comes to things like the seasons. That's when it matters, but it's not going to affect the climate overall, and it's not going to cause temperatures to rise overall over time. We're talking about a 365-day cycle, just like everything else. So that's just silly. And it's funny. It actually kind of cracks me up when people bring that shit up to me, because I'm like, yeah, I also have a degree in astrophysics. So do you want to talk about this with me or not?
I think this is a good one maybe to read through and kind of break down. So their claim here is that global warming is only part human caused. And so since it's only part of it, then that would mean that, we don't need to do anything, or that we shouldn't change what we're doing because we're not the problem.
We're part of the problem, so we're not the problem.
Yeah, which is fallacious. We know that. So the first paragraph, they say, this is an interesting myth because it's very ambiguous. Which part? What percentage? How much warming is human caused versus natural cycle? The problem is it's part true and part not true, so context is needed. One needs to understand the difference between natural variation and the new path the climate is on.
I'd like to point out underneath here's why the second sentence that says it's at the CO2 levels is at 399 parts per million. Now, this was in 2014. Like I said earlier, the Keeling curve states it's around 420 parts per million. That's quite an increase, for 20 parts per million, more than 20 parts per million in the past, 8 years? 6, 7, 8, 8 years. That's an insanely high jump between the two. I look like, it's so weird to me because, I remember studying the Keeling curve when I was getting my degree, and it being, under 400, and the fact that talking about how, oh God, we're, what are we going to do when it reaches 400 and above? And now it has, and it's been over 400 for years now. And that's frightening. It even says here, oh, it's an increase of about 42% from pre-industrial levels. Yeah, that's a lot in, a global time scale. You're talking about hundreds of thousands and millions of years for climates to normally change, whereas this has been 170 years from pre-industrial times. So, and we've also been able to see that there was an increase, a small increase in CO2 levels from before the industrial era because of humans' usage of biofuels, meaning, the burning wood and stuff like that. It did actually slightly increase the amount of CO2 output and greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, but not to the degree that it has now. So we even have proof that before before we started burning fossil fuels, that our own energy needs were a problem when it comes to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this one does end up getting to that it is related to human input. What do you think about the idea that, well, of course the climate is changing at an extremely rapid rate, but this is just our new normal. Do you think that this is a reasonable argument for people to say, well, this is just the trend is just changing, and this is our new normal, and this is going to happen anyway?
Well, that would mean that our new normal would have to be changed, though, completely, because it's not. We didn't get to a certain point and then it stayed the same, and it's just bad now. It's continuing to get worse. And talk about different things that affect our health when it comes to climate change. We're talking about air pollution, increased ozone levels at ground level are causing higher rates of lung disease, and people that have like asthma and stuff like that, they're seeing increased rates of hospitalization. Increased temperature changes that we're talking about drought. We're talking about losing food resources, because there's only food can only grow in certain areas for a certain amount of time. If you have, you can pull up global or Google Earth, the 3D one, and go to the Sahara for instance, and go back, say, 50, 70 years. And it's a lot greener than it is now. It's completely, there's drought that is happening at such an intense level that climate refugees are pouring into the countries. We were talking about this beforehand. They did. The countries that are causing this the most. The U.S., for example, has about 4% of the population, but we produce about 15% of CO2 levels in our atmosphere. So we are causing a big part of the issue, but we are protected for the most part. Humans in general, if they have the funding, can move. They can, having access to air conditioning makes a difference. They find there were increases in deaths because of temperature changes. Every year is a record temperature. There's a record temperature sense every year. Yet, as the countries with more money that people can actually have air conditioning and just houses in general, more access to clean water, stuff like that. They're still not as affected as the ones that don't have access to clean water, to the food sources. Let's see, disease vectors. Do you want to talk about what disease vectors are, Ben?
Yeah. So a big thing that we're seeing with the climate change, and this is something shared by the World Health Organization, they have an article talking about the health impacts of climate change. And the fact is, for a lot of people who are denying this climate change, a lot of them are living in the United States, or they're living in Europe, or some place where they have decent amount of resources, decent access to food sources, clean water sources. And the fact is that the majority of people who are producing these greenhouse gases through industrial means are not the ones that are going to be, suffering from the consequences of it, because they're benefiting from the resources provided by these. However, it is the people who are in food deserts, people who are in developing countries, who don't have the access to the clean water supplies, clean food supplies, the ecosystems that are being torn down. They are the ones that are being affected by this. So things like disease vectors, like we're saying, you're seeing increases in cholera due to lack of clean water and other such disease vectors, but also just thinking about the impact on ecosystems. And we're seeing more zoonoses now with climate change, and you can even see this now. We've got things like monkeypox coming up, and I'm not making claims necessarily that we would or would not have had monkeypox if it weren't for climate change. I don't know that. I can't make any claims on that. But the fact that we are displacing organisms, displacing entire ecosystems, we're seeing some groups running into each other that normally wouldn't have, and you're seeing spread of diseases among populations that we wouldn't have seen before. So this does impact us. This does impact our health as a society, and it is beneficial to, look into, again, mitigating some of this damage and helping these other organisms be able to survive, because it's not just us. Like their existence impacts ours. And so we can't destroy these other organisms and then expect to not be affected by it. We are interconnected, and that sounds cheesy, but we are.
You talked about zoonotic diseases, and we can't talk about that and not mention COVID.
Yeah.
The fact is that, and I actually, right at the beginning of the pandemic, I made a video back when I made videos talking about how there's a very good likelihood that, COVID was probably, it probably happened because of climate change. And then it turns out that, God, it was fucking 8 months ago or so that Cambridge came out with a study to show that, yes, in fact, it probably happened, because the amount, you're not just talking about the interconnection of species, you're talking about as climate zones spread, the temperature gets warmer. Like you look in America, for instance, and there are places that are subtropical areas that are spreading north because of the increase in temperature. So you have disease vectors such as mosquitoes and ticks and things that weren't found in certain northern states that are now being found there. The area around Wuhan, where it looks like COVID originated, there were about 100 different species of bats that have been introduced into that area in the past decade or so because of the changing climate, which is most likely where the COVID came from. Not only the intermingling, like you said, you have humans encroaching upon ecosystems that they shouldn't, they're in an area where these zoonotic diseases have spread, allowing for the increased chance of us being exposed to it, but among themselves as well. So when it comes to disease vectors, there's such a huge, this is one of the things you have to sit down and say, look, I know that you think that this isn't affecting us, that other species are dying off and whatnot, but would we have had COVID, at least to the extent that we did? And we even said at the very beginning, look, this of COVID, if this is true, this is just the beginning. And then, like you said, here comes monkeypox. There are ancient diseases that are being released from permafrost that is thawing. The permafrost that has been frozen for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years in some cases, that we have no immunity to because we haven't needed to. These are long gone, dead viruses and illnesses that all of a sudden is coming out of the permafrost. Just the amount of change isn't just, oh, it's warmer outside. I wanted to bring up something really quick that Neil had said about they found a new hole in the ozone. Surprisingly, did not know about that. One of the things that I get from climate denialists is, oh, well, whatever happened to the problem with the ozone layer? Well, that was the Montreal Protocol. If you know anything about climate accords, there have been 3 major climate accords in our history. Paris is what we have currently. There was the Kyoto Protocol, and then there was the Montreal Protocol. And the Montreal Protocol was specific to reducing CFCs and stopping CFCs in order to combat the issue of ozone hole depletion. And we did. We made an effective effort as a global community to stop the use of chlorofluorocarbons in order to stop increasing the holes in the ozone layer. And we were able to do that. So it was our, looking into the science and understanding the science and actually putting it into some kind of play that made a difference. So by saying, oh, well, look, nothing happened with the ozone layer, you're actually proving the opposite, that we can do something and we have done something. It makes me sad that that this might be a problem again, because we have enough problems when it comes to climate.
So the WHO said in this article is from October 2021, so this is recent. They're saying that between 2030 and 2050, climate change is expected to cause approximately 250,000 additional deaths per year from malnutrition, malaria, diarrhea, and heat stress. And basically, they're attributing a lot of this to areas with weak health infrastructure, areas that are not as able to cope without assistance, and people are also going to be affected because they don't have access to transport, or something else that's huge here is air pollution, and with respiratory issues. Any insight on that in terms of air pollution?
The air pollution, like I said, you're increasing the amount of ozone that is at surface on the surface level. There is a lot there. There are about 20 different ways that temperatures extremes on both sides can cause issues with air pollution. Although the higher the temperature, the more of a chance it is to get worse. This is a problem. This tends to be a problem worse in urban areas as well as poorer areas, because you have power plants and things like that that are built more around lower income areas, which kind of has this domino effect on the populations there. So not only do they not have the best access to healthcare, but they're also pumped full of these chemicals and increased ozone because of the air pollution. And there's also an increase in pollen amounts. I know that sounds silly, but the amount of precipitation is, the extreme weather conditions have a tendency to produce more precipitation, which produces more pollen, and warmer months for longer amounts of time equals more pollen. And that can be deadly to some people. The amount of allergies in itself is increased. Yeah, we were talking about this earlier too. The Southern Hemisphere has a tendency to be more affected by climate change than the Northern Hemisphere does, not only in terms of ecosystem, or not only in terms of, the fact that there's a lot of third world countries more in the Southern Hemisphere than the Northern Hemisphere, but there's a way that the Earth kind of breathes. If you look at a long-term healing curve, it kind of does this in out thing, where it's the seasons, except don't forget that the seasons are the opposites on the Southern Hemisphere than the Northern Hemisphere. So as the Northern Hemisphere is breathing out and taking that wintertime breath, the increase in climate disasters is happening more on the Southern Hemisphere than the Northern Hemisphere. Drought is much more prevalent. An increase in precipitation can be an issue as well, not only in terms of what it does to any small ecosystem. And remember, each ecosystem is connected to the next, to the point where the Earth is just one big ecosystem. But the droughts are the increased precipitation can add, you were talking about diarrheal diseases. That can happen with both a lack of water and an increase, a strong increase in water in certain areas, especially if they do not have access to clean water. Just because there is water doesn't mean it's clean, doesn't mean that it's going to make people sick. Another big issue is the fact that increased CO2 levels increase the amount of nitrogen in the soil, which depletes the amount of nutrients in all of our foods. And if farmers don't have access to, chemicals and fertilizers that are able to replenish the nitrogen in the soil, you end up with much less nutritious food to begin with. And it kind of goes down the line from there. Plus, with as much as food is costing nowadays, we have to our food has to travel a long way, and it's such a stupid thing. It's so important for everybody to eat as locally as we can, because when you talk about the amount of CO2 or greenhouse gases in general that are pumped in the atmosphere because of the food that we grow, you have to take into consideration how much that food travels. So if you're try to eat as locally as possible to decrease that effect. But some people, that's not an option, especially if they're in an area of drought or just a place that doesn't have the food that they need. And farmers are having to increase the amount of what is the word, pesticides that they use, because, as like I said, disease vectors, and what the same idea goes for pests for our crops. The larger the area, the spreading climate systems, the more pests and the greater they are to thrive off of. There are actually species that thrive off of the changing climate, the rising temperatures. In fact, rattlesnakes, and that's not related, but rattlesnakes absolutely love climate change, because they're able to they have a preferred body temperature, I think between 87 and 89 degrees, so they're able to be dormant for less amount of the year and do their own rattlesnakey thing for longer because they have less precipitation and more heat. So there are other species, especially pests, that tend to do that.
Huh. Well, I found another article. I mean, this is just a list of things that are fun to talk about. So we're gonna pull this up and we're gonna address these points one by one. And I think we've talked about some of them already, but this is called 9 Things You Need to Know About the Climate Change Hoax. And this was written in 2016, so this is old, but it's funny to read. So they start off by saying, with Hurricane Matthew wreaking havoc, the left is predictably seizing the storm as a means of promoting their radical global warming agenda. Climate change has not been a major theme this election cycle, talking about 2016. So they're making this political. So here are 9 things we apparently need to know about the climate change hoax. So number 1 is that the ClimateGate scandal proved that key data involving man-made climate change was manipulated. In 2009, the public discovered emails from the University of East Anglia's Climatic Research Unit exposing how scientists who have been enormously influential in promoting the concept of man-made climate change actually attempted to cook the books to obtain results that served their narrative that the planet was heating at a dangerous trend due to higher levels of carbon dioxide.
My question is this: what exactly are we gaining from a climate change hoax? Other than, oh, you get paid. Yes, as any scientist does, I get paid to research science. Obviously, I'm fucking homeless, so like there isn't a fucking truck pulling up dumping money outside of my door at all. Like this idea that me and other climate scientists are spreading this hoax for our own agenda, it makes no sense to me. But what reason would big oil and their side have to lie about it? Like the fuck ton of money that they make? I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, this whole first point is very
also, I've never heard
but
what is ClimateGate? I've never heard of
I don't even know. I guess
they tack gate to the end of every scandal. It's like that was the name of the hotel. Stop doing that.
ClimateGate. It looks like some. It said in November 2009, over 1,000 private emails between climate change scientists were stolen and published online. The uproar that followed briefly shook the public's faith in global warming science and prompted investigations that debunked skeptics' allegations. And the mails showed the planet wasn't warming, yet still scientists have questions to answer. So some emails got leaked, and people think that this was a conspiracy.
Yeah. Well, clearly it wasn't that big of a deal because even I've never heard of it. But no, it's one of those times where you can literally just look outside and see the fucking planet is on fire. Like, like I said, every year we have global temperatures that are higher than they at global average temperatures that were higher than they were the last year. You hear, oh, record temperatures set here. There are places on the planet, we have this 1.5, this mythical 1.5 degree temperature change globally, that once we hit it, that's kind of our point of no return, except we're going to hit it no matter what at this point. It's just a matter of how long we get to it. But there are places on this planet that have average temperatures that have increased almost 2 degrees, depends on where you are. It's just silly to me that they would think that. I don't understand why. And plus, like, let's break it down to this. Even if we were wrong, what is the worst that happens if we fix things? We have a cleaner planet. Like, why is that such a horrible thing? They're always so concerned about the economics of it. And if you break it down, if countries were to follow the Paris Climate Accord, we would actually be making an incredible amount of money on sustainable energy. Once we get to that point, obviously there's infrastructure and whatnot that needs to be set up beforehand. There is going to be kind of a learning curve and an amount of time before we can drop off the fossil fuels completely, but it's possible. We have the technology to do it. It's just a matter of spending money to make money at some point. We can't. There's just no way to continue the way we're continuing. Okay, number 2. The ClimateGate scandal was given a new life in 2011 with the release of the new emails. Okay, so these are these emails. Any work we have done in the past is done on the back of research grants we get and has to be well hidden. Okay, so remember what I said, though, about how prior to about 2004, 2005, there was no specific direction that we had. We weren't looking into what exactly makes what is causing climate change. It was global warming at this point. We didn't have any directed science. All we had was a conglomeration of research, decades worth of research and data that all pointed this way. So in order to say back in 2009, only a few years after we even made this proclamation decision, is laughable in and of itself.
Yeah, so even in one of the previous paragraphs, they had called the climate scientists a cabal, which is the language that this article uses to talk about scientists is a lot of the same language that people use just in political propaganda in general, like when they talk about trans people or the LGBT community and how we're like they're comparing us to like these religious culty organizations, which is not even addressing the arguments. Like bringing in cult language does not do anything to debunk climate change. If you're going to debunk climate change, and let's say that this scandal did happen and there was some sketchy activity within the government. Okay, I mean, sketchy things happen frequently. People do sketchy things. But how does that debunk climate change? Where's your data? You're attacking science with politics, which doesn't do anything for your argument. Bring an argument, bring data, because even if there is a scandal in the government that does nothing to demonstrate whether or not climate change is happening and what the cause of said climate change is.
Well, it's like with the COVID thing. There was no reason to make it political. And once they did, it just completely split it into two factions. I don't understand ever making science of any kind political. It should just merely be about the science and the data and what is put forth. And by making it political, you have people on both sides that ignore the science completely just because of the side they're on. Even I'm sure there are people on the left that do it as well. Doesn't mean they're not right, but it's not okay to just believe what we're saying just because you're on that side of the political spectrum. It should be about the science, period.
Absolutely. Speaking of science, I know you have some thoughts about NASA. So the next claim is about NASA. NASA may also have been involved in manipulating data to serve the narrative of man-made climate change. The Washington Times reported in 2009, under pressure in 2007, NASA recalculated its data and found that 1934, not 1998, was the hottest year in records for the contiguous 48 states. NASA later changed that data again, and now 1998 and 2006 are tied for first, with 1934 slightly cooler.
Yeah, I usually get in trouble a lot for this. Like, oh, you worked for NASA, therefore you shouldn't have an opinion because I'm a NASA shill or whatever the fuck. It's ridiculous. There was I don't know about this specifically. There was something that happened in 1934 that ended up with certain areas of the world that were hotter, and it was uh, completely out of the left phenomenon. Nothing really explains it other than kind of a shit happens, but there's no trend to it or trend afterwards. Whereas everything that's happening now, all the temperature increases, you can see the trend, you can see it continuing to increase. And um, it, every year since 2011, I think 2012 has been the hottest recorded year on record since then. So this is a moot point anyway. But yeah, they love going after the bigger groups like NASA or the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, and just completely ignore any of their data at all because obviously, they have an agenda. The thing is, though, that it's a deflection thing. When you yourself or your side has an agenda, it's hard to not see an agenda on the other side as well. We don't have an agenda. I would love to be able to put my books down and say, hey, it's solved, let's move on to the next thing. But that's just not the case. It's not solved. We're in serious trouble, and it's getting worse and worse literally every day.
Well, and what they're doing here too is they're saying that, okay, NASA released new data, they corrected themselves. Like, okay, scientists do that frequently. That is the goal of science, is to correct things that were not true or less accurate. We're trying to get better, and the more we study, generally, the better we get about relaying accurate information.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't bother me the fact that whether or not NASA had an incorrect number that they released and then changed that to be a different number when they got new information. That's not shocking to me.
Yeah.
That's not disturbing at all to me. That's what I would expect an organization that is scientific to do.
Mm-hmm.
I would want them to update their stats.
Yeah. Goes back to the whole, the lack of scientific education in this country, the fact that people will throw that back in our faces. Oh, well, this changed or whatever. You changed your opinion. It's not really you don't really have a scientific opinion, but you know what I mean, about something. And like I said, the whole point of science is attempting to disprove your hypothesis. You don't want to, I'm not saying you want to be wrong, but you poke at your theses as much as you can, and you keep poking, you keep prodding, and you keep studying and looking through the data to make sure that what you're putting forward is right. So when we are wrong, a real scientist will say, yes, this was incorrect, and move forward from there. Whereas, biblical people, they have a tendency, everything is based in, speaking of which, brings up the Bible. Exactly. Oh, nothing has changed in the 2,000 years since the Bible, so it must be correct. That is the incorrect way to think about it, though.
Mm-hmm. Number 4. NASA also declared 2014 to be the hottest year on record, despite the fact that they were only 38% sure about it. What's your thought on this? The latter fact was left out of their press release at the time, as well as the fact that 2014 was supposedly hotter than the previous hottest year, 2010, well within the margin of error of the 0.1 degrees Celsius that scientists tend to adhere by. The Washington Post attempted to spin in favor of NASA by arguing that NASA simply said that 2014 was the most likely hottest year on record, but their press release unequivocally stated that 2014 was the warmest year on record, and leaving out the aforementioned key facts makes such a declaration seem misleading, as it's clearly not a guarantee that 2014 was even likely the hottest year on record. Wow. Okay. So they're once again going with the, well, you can't guarantee this number, therefore we're just going to throw everything out. This is clearly not someone who's studied the scientific method or probably has not read any scientific journals, because you don't give guarantees ever in science. You give, my data shows that most likely, or it shows likely that there is an influence on this whatever variable. You don't ever give a guarantee. And if I see a study that gives a guarantee on anything, throwing it out, because that probably does not guarantee anything.
Yeah, exactly. And they're completely mincing words here too. Plus with press releases, journal articles, or not journal articles, anything you put out for public consumption is not going to sit there and explain what the data is and might be. Something like, was the hottest year on record? Yes, that's what they're going to say. If that's that's just, it seems like they're working way too hard at this one to disprove it. Like, you're kind of maybe wrong, so everything.
They're playing some word games. Like, you are not 100% confident, so I don't believe you. Why are you not 100% confident? But then, like, realizing that the hottest year on record, so that's the current records. Like, that's what we are looking at the moment. That implies that we're going to have different records that are going to have different numbers as we move forward, because obviously I haven't experienced next year yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, we go through time and we get new numbers as we move on with time. But this is just a weird argument in general to be making.
Yeah.
Point 5, there is no evidence that the Earth has been warming in recent years.
Really? None at all?
None. No evidence.
Even though literally in the paragraph above it said it did, but that's fine.
Mm-hmm. And we're at we don't even really need to explain number 5, because that's clearly debunked. Point 6 was the 97%. So they're saying that the left likes to claim that 97% of scientists support the concept of man-made climate change. It's likely closer to 43%.
I would like to see where they're getting those numbers. Also, again, are we talking about people that work, within any kind of environmental field at all? Or are we talking about it? That's kind of
this is supposedly the study that they study. It's a survey.
It's a survey.
That has this number. It's a survey, and I like to see the design study for said survey, because if anyone at all can say that they're a scientist, that would explain a lot. But I don't know. I'm going to look at.
And also, it could be focused to specific scientists or a specific community.
Mm-hmm. This is okay.
And I also like to point out too that even though it doesn't seem like that long ago, 2015, in terms of climate science, was kind of a long time ago. I mean, we find new, and for some people that's hard to understand, that it's climate science in and of itself is a relatively new science. The first climate scientist, the person who first talked about the climate changing because of greenhouse gas emissions, was Eunice Foote back in the late 19th century. In terms of it becoming an actual discipline, we've only been around maybe half a century, and even that time frame, it's a relatively new science. That doesn't make it any less credible than the next. So, like I said, you're talking about combining a fuck ton of scientific disciplines in order to come to this consensus of what is happening with our climate and how we affect it and whatnot.
So this doesn't. So if we're looking at the responses of this survey, I'm seeing that the majority of these people do think that there is human influence, because if you take the boxes that say no warming or less than 0%, that is, you have 0.4% for no warming and 0.2% for less than 0%. And then you have a 9.9% of unknown, an 8.8% of I don't know, and 3.1% of other. So even according to this, the majority, if you add up everything that's from 0 to more than 100%, is significantly higher than 43%.
Where did they get the 40? Like, is it just the people that are 100%?
I don't know how they, in the last article, I don't know where they pulled that 43% number.
Basically,
so
it's their ass.
Yeah, well, and it seems interesting too that the way that they're presenting that survey, it's almost as if they are wanting this to be a binary answer choice of, do you believe in man-made climate change or do you not? Whereas the survey was saying, what percentage of the climate change do you think is related to human causes?
Yeah.
Which are totally different questions.
Yeah, because there's obviously there are other ways that our climate changes naturally. There is not a single climate scientist out there that will tell you that climate change is 100% anthropogenic. Like, that would be insane. So that, the fact that they have to manipulate the data like this in order to, fit their answer is pretty telling in and of itself.
Yeah, this is not a binary. There's almost nothing in science is a neat binary where you can put things into a box of it is this or it isn't this.
Gender. Two genders, god damn it.
Only two.
Sorry.
Like, you have degrees of variation, and this is another example of it's not just a do you believe or do you not. There are and they're wanting to make it that because and this is something that you see with the kind of the lack of respect for expertise that we've been seeing in this past decade, especially, where you have two people that are being presented and they say, well, we have to get both sides, as if there are only two sides to an argument, and as if one side is affirmative and one side is negative, leaving anywhere in the middle of saying, well, I agree with this point, but not this point, or like I'm like there's more than just a yes or no, but they will present a scientist and say, this is the spokesperson for everything affirmative side, and then I'm going to bring some random Joe Schmo who is completely on the negative side, disagrees with every single point that the scientist makes, as if that these are the two sides to the argument, and as if that this person with no experience has any way to comprehend where the scientist is coming from, as if that these are two equally competing sides, which they're not. What you should do, get multiples of the experts who probably don't agree on every single point. There are probably keystone points that they all generally accept. Like with climate science, you have certain points that are generally accepted, but you all probably disagree on many points within there about what is the level of contribution, what other data do we have, and what does this data signify. Like, that's a very different conversation than do you believe or do you not believe?
Yeah, and I'm giving equal platform to people with no actual experience or that is involved in the science. The same thing happened with COVID. You had let's bring on an immunologist versus some random douchebag that is anti-vax, and you're giving them an equal platform, you're giving them an equal voice, and to the public that makes it seem like the latter person's opinion or their knowledge is equivalent to the person with actual degree in science, and that's just not the case. And that's one of the hardest things about, I don't know if it's the internet or if it's the 24-hour news cycle or just the constant bombardment of information that we have to fill that space. We have this platform, like I said, that should not be given the same equivalence, and unfortunately it is. So people see, Joe Schmo, and they, if they fall in the middle somewhere and Joe Schmo says something that might make a little more sense to them, they'll tip over to that side instead of actually taking real evidence and data into consideration. And that's what has become so difficult about being a scientist nowadays, is that anybody can say something against your research or your discipline, and they're taken as seriously as you. That's not fair.
Speaking of that, this guy says that the amount of Arctic sea ice has become quite high.
Okay.
And therefore, that runs directly counter to the predictions of climate change models. So checkmate, climate scientists. Some guy who wrote an article on the internet said that the Arctic sea ice is high and gives no data.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and assume that they took their data from one certain area at a certain time of year and compared it to a completely different area at a completely different time of year, and that was their data. Like, and not actually presenting it, but I know for a fact that that's not true. That's insane. Like, you can see videos online of just giant sheets of ice dropping off, and it's devastating and heartbreaking. At the same time, though, I love the sound that it makes. Have you ever heard a giant sheet of ice just drop off into the ocean out in the middle of nowhere? It makes a really cool ass sound. Just saying. Anyway. Yeah, no, that's completely false.
Point
But
eight,
again, like,
money.
he can just throw this
yeah.
fact out and not be refuted at all. So,
Point 8, money from the federal government and leftist organizations fuel a lot of misinformation from man-made global warming alarmists. Climate change alarmism is an extremely lucrative industry. All in all, there have been over 32.5 billion of federal government grants that have funded climate change research from 1989 to 2009, far more than any research funded by the oil industry.
That's bullshit, first of all, more than funded by for my research group does get a lot of its money from like the NSF. I'm not gonna lie, that's a lot of science gets funded, by the governments. And it is like fucking fighting for table scraps. I swear to God, I spend half of my life, my career life, proving that what I do is important and begging for money that barely covers anything at all. Like, if anybody that's worked in any scientific field knows how hard it is to get funding, and we certainly aren't getting our funding and rolling around on the bed in it. Like, every single penny has to be accounted for, and every year we're going to cut this and cut this and cut this. That's just insane. There is no profit to be made out of, at least, I can't certainly say for every scientific discipline, but in terms of research science and climate science, no, that's just nuts. That's really frustrating to hear that anybody, and I'm pretty sure even the guy writing this doesn't believe that. I'm sure they're just lying for the sake of his argument, but like, there's somebody that will read this and go, yeah, that makes sense. And it's heartbreaking, really.
Point number 9. It is patently absurd to link Hurricane Matthew to climate change, not just because of the aforementioned reasons, but because, as Marco Morano points out at Climate Depot, the data show for the last 10 years, we have had an unusual drought of landfalling major hurricanes category 3 and higher on the continental U.S. That's right, no major hurricanes have made landfall for over a decade. This is the longest such drought on record. I don't know much about hurricanes.
Well, aside from like, I can tell you that not all, without looking it up, I mean, not all hurricanes hit land. In fact, a small percentage of them do. So that proves literally nothing. But you know, you go through the hurricanes go through the letters of the alphabet, so you know when we're getting to S mid-season, there's a lot of fucking hurricanes, you know. So that's just insane. Not only have the amount of hurricanes, and this was about the time that I was getting, you know, my master's, so I wasn't working quite in the field before 2010. But yeah, we know that not only the amount of hurricanes have increased, and that's just straight data, but the how extreme that they are, and the amount of people that are displaced because of it, the amount of infrastructure damage due to hurricane season is insurmountable at this point. So that's just a lie. So, but again, like I said, I mean, he could have this kernel of truth there, because he said those that hit land. That's it, you know, the only discernible difference.
Yeah. So this was a lot of weird stuff today, and I genuinely enjoyed this episode because it's great when I don't talk much and my guest gets to share their piece, because I don't know a lot about climate change. Like, I'm just as ignorant on this issue as the majority of the population, but I just happen to listen to people who know things. And so I learned a lot today. I learned a lot about how to combat some of these arguments that people are giving about climate change. But to kind of debrief from everything that we read and everything that we talked about, if the audience is to take anything away from this conversation today, what would you want them to leave with?
You could ask the question, is it too late? And I think it's important for everybody to recognize that while we are fucked, it's true, like, there are things that we can do to mitigate the amount of suffering, not just for us, but for other species, that we can actually make a difference. And, you know, who knows what we'll be able to find in the future to be able to reverse things or change things. Like 20 years ago, we would have never even thought of the words carbon capture. And that's the technology that we're working on that, you know, will be able to help mitigate the problems. I think what you just said, though, in terms of, like, I've spoken to you about climate change before. You're not ignorant on the subject, yet someone as intelligent and as knowledgeable as you is able to stand back and say, look, this is not my area of expertise. Let's listen to those who know what they're talking about. It's just nice to hear. So, but yeah, we can make a difference. Care about not just the humans on this planet that are affected, but the other species as well. Because even if at the end of the day you only care about the people, other species that are affected will in the end affect us, because we are a global ecosystem and every species is interconnected with the next on some way or another, and that's important. But
Absolutely.
I really appreciate you having me on. This was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to do another one on climate change. It seems like the audience really enjoyed this topic of conversation. Where can people find you?
Mostly on Twitter, Pale Blue Mama. I have a channel, but I've been a little preoccupied as of late. So, but yeah, just mostly on Twitter. Yeah, hit me up if you have any questions. Anybody, I'm always happy to talk about climate change with people.
Yeah, and she's we've got her links in the description below. Definitely, she does have a lot of videos on YouTube about these subjects and about other subjects as well. So go check those out. You can find her on Twitter. Like she said, she's happy to answer questions about climate change. So I know some people probably still had some questions, and you can ask those. I guess in terms of things that I've got going on, I'm going to be gone for 3 weeks. So doing some adult things, work stuff that I got to do. So we will not have medical myths until July, I think, unless I want to do one while at the Better conference in June, but I will be going there during my break. So no medical myths the next 3 weeks. I'm going to miss all of you. No trivia as well. I do, though, I'm going to be releasing some edited videos for while I'm gone. So you will get some content. I'm going to have some embryology videos kind of going. I'm planning a whole series going step by step through human gestation. So I'm going to have the first 2 videos, the first one about fertilization and the second one about the first few cell stages from zygote through blastocyst. That's going to be coming up. I might have a third video as well. We'll see if that comes up or if that will be released later. Once again, I would like to thank the patrons. So thank you for supporting my channel. Reggie, Kevin, Uncle Beck, Hannibal, and tons of mice. If you are a patron, you get access to the after show, which you can find the link to that on Patreon. We're going to go hang out there afterwards. So definitely, if you're interested in that, you can go to Patreon and become a member. I also have a Discord. I have a Facebook page if you want to stay current on announcements for the channel. I did, after Katie was on the show, recommended that I start a Ko-fi or no one ever knows how to pronounce that site. We need to like standardize how to pronounce it, because every single time that site is mentioned, nobody knows how to pronounce it. But I did get one at the recommendation of Katie, so I will put that in the chat. That did not copy. Oh, okay, here we go. I can technology, guys. I promise. I promise I'm not bad at. Yeah, twitch.tv/student-dr.ben is the website. If you want my Twitch, I will not be there for the next 3 weeks. But I will see the patrons over on the Patreon in a little bit. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Manda, for joining. We will see you all in the next one. Bye, everyone.